Good morning! Welcome to Social Studies with Miss Rogers, World History Edition. Today we're going to discuss our last ancient civilization, which is Rome. Rome will have a multitude of influences on the modern world, from our government to some of our favorite books like Harry Potter. So, let's get started. We learned in our previous class that after Alexander the Great passed away, his empire was split into 3 different sections: the Seleucids, the Ptolemies, and the Antigonids. We also mentioned that the Antigonids would eventually be taken over by the Romans, which is true. But before Rome was this big and powerful entity, it was just a little bitty city. So how did this little bitty city even start to develop? Well, that calls for a story time on the myth of Romulus and Remus. Romulus and Remus were twin boys born to a princess named Rhea Silvia. Their father was the fierce Roman god of war, Mars. The king where the boys lived was scared that someday Romulus and Remus would overthrow him and take his throne. So he had the boys left in a basket on the Tiber River. He figured they would die soon and his problems would all be solved. However, the boys were found by a she-wolf. The wolf cared for them and protected them from other wild animals. It's said that a friendly woodpecker also helped to find them food. Eventually, some shepherds found them in the forest, and one shepherd even took the boys home and raised them as his own children. As the boys grew older, they became natural leaders. One day, Remus was captured and taken to the king, and the king discovered his true identity. Romulus gathered some shepherds to go and rescue his brother, and they ended up killing the king in the process. When the city learned who the boys were, they offered the crown to them as joint kings. They could be rulers of their homeland. However, they turned the crowns down and instead decided to go and find and create their own city. The twins left and set out to find the perfect spot for their future city. The twins eventually came to the place where Rome is located today. They both liked the general area, but each wanted to place the city on a different hill. They agreed to wait for a sign from the gods to determine which hill to use. Remus saw a flock of 6 vultures first and claimed, "Hey, this is our sign." But Romulus saw a flock of 12 and said, "No, this is the sign." Remus insisted that his sign came first, therefore he won and the gods sided with him. Romulus claimed his sign was larger and that his sign was the real sign from the gods. If you're an only child and you're thinking, wow, this is ridiculous, just know, this is an accurate representation of how siblings fight. This is what you're missing in your life. It's a good time. The twins decided to go ahead and start working on building their own cities, and whoever built the best one would win. Romulus started building a wall for his city, and Remus was jealous of the progress he was making. He started making fun of Romulus's wall, saying it would never be enough to protect the people. At one point, Remus jumped over the wall to show his brother how stupid his wall was, and Romulus was so irritated with his brother that he stabbed him to death. Those only child students are probably thinking, stabbing each other? Is this also what I'm missing from my life? And the answer is, sometimes. It is what it is. With Remus dead, Romulus continued to work on his city. He officially founded the city in 753 BC, made himself king, and named it Rome after himself. From there, he began to organize the city, and it grew and prospered. And for over 1,000 years, Rome would be one of the most powerful cities in the world. Rome was built exactly where Romulus wanted it, and it's written that he died when a mysterious whirlwind picked him up and carried him away. We know very little about the first settlers of the Roman area, but we do know that one group called the Latins lived in the region. These people spoke Latin, which, like Greek, is an Indo-European language. The Latins were herders and farmers who lived in settlements on top of Rome's hills. The Greeks came to Italy in large numbers during the age of Hellenism. The Greeks had major influences on those in Rome. They cultivated grapes and olives, passed on their alphabet, which we are going to mention a little bit later today, and gave the Romans artistic and cultural models through sculptures, architecture, literature, and on top of that, lots of Roman mythology was heavily borrowed from the Greeks. For example, in our Romulus and Remus story, Mars, the god of war, is just a reflection of Ares, the Greek god of war. Then there were the Etruscans. They were actually the group who mostly influenced the early development of Rome. The Etruscans found Rome as a village and they turned it into a city, meaning they brought a trading center. In about 509 BC, the Romans overthrew the last Etruscan king and established their Roman Republic. Where have I heard this word before? Just in case you were not paying attention in class last time, a republic is where citizens elect leaders to make decisions for them. And America is a republic. I will never understand why we are so obsessed with the idea of Greek democracy, but it doesn't exist anywhere anymore. America and many other countries around the world take after the Romans and adopted a republic style of government, and for some reason just keep pretending it's a democracy. But it's a very different political system. Whew, okay, rant over. Rome inspires American politics in many more ways than just using a republic model, and we'll see more of this in a second. Early Rome was divided up into two social classes, the patricians and the plebeians. The patricians were wealthy landowners, and they would become Rome's ruling class. Less wealthy landowners, small farmers, craftspeople, and merchants were a part of a larger group called the plebeians. Men in both social groups were considered citizens and were able to vote. However, only the patricians were allowed to be elected into office. One example of this would be the Senate. The Senate's job originally was to make decrees. Decrees were suggestions that were presented to the consuls in government, but the decrees typically were followed. So over time, the Senate's power grew, and it was just understood that the Senate would be listened to. Fast forward to modern day for a second. Here in America, our legislative branch of government writes laws. It's split into two houses, the upper house called the Senate, and the lower house called the House of Representatives. This 100% is an example of ancient Rome influencing our government. The chief executive officers of the Roman Republic were the consuls and the praetors. Two consuls chosen every year both ran the government and led the Roman army into battle. The praetors were in charge of civil laws that applied to Roman citizens. And as Roman territory expanded, another praetor was added to judge cases involving non-citizens. In modern-day America, you would typically associate the idea of Roman consuls to modern ideas of a president. They are the executive power, they run the government, and they're in charge of the military. So right now, we still have itty-bitty Rome. That's gonna change when Rome comes into contact with Carthage. Now, we are gonna back up for a second because Carthage is much more relevant to our class than you might think. Always remember, everything in world history is connected. Do you remember when we talked about Judaism, and we discussed how the area was constantly under attack and conquered? Well, when the Jewish people split into their two sections of land, Judah and Israel, the land to the north that was gone from their control became what we refer to as Phoenicia. Phoenicia was not just one kingdom, but like Greece, it was a group of various city-states such as Tyre, Sidon, and Byblos. The Phoenicians created an alphabet of 22 letters, where each one letter stood for a certain sound, and this contrasted from languages already created where symbols would stand for a whole word or phrase. The Phoenician alphabet is the origin of not only our alphabet and language, but most modern-day languages, including Greek. And we already talked about how the Greek passed its alphabet on to Rome. The Phoenicians invaded areas all around the Mediterranean and created a large number of colonies. The most prosperous colony was Carthage, located off the coast of Africa. We know from our Judaism video that the area Phoenicia was located in was under attack a lot. Like all of the time. And the Phoenicians were a lot like teenagers in that they didn't like being told what to do. And their conquerors dealt with them severely. Phoenicia as a whole lost a lot of its power and freedom after, being burned to the ground. But their colony Carthage stood strong and became its own independent, powerful entity. Which brings us to our current story with Rome. Rome and Carthage will engage in what is called the Punic Wars. There are 3 mini wars in this set of Punic Wars. What starts this is basically control over this island off the coast of modern-day Italy called Sicily. Carthage is a very big power and doesn't think much of these Romans. The Carthaginians rule the Mediterranean Sea and their navy is unstoppable, but they underestimate the army of Rome. Rome wins the First Punic War, and this forces Carthage to exit the island Sicily, but also, Rome has the guts to tell Carthage, yeah man, you caused a lot of damage during this war, and we won, so as the loser, we expect you to pay for all these damages. Thanks so much. The proud empire of Carthage would not stand for this kind of humiliation, and they encouraged their best general to do something about it, introducing Hannibal Barca. Hannibal Barca had an idea to attack the Romans with something they had never seen before. Elephants! Can you imagine never having seen this kind of animal before and then it just pops up in your street? I mean, this is something that would be out of a nightmare. A monster bigger than your house with a huge nose carrying soldiers with spears and swords. I mean, people would be terrified. And you know what an elephant is, but even you know that elephants can be dangerous. Elephants are not native to Italy or Rome, so Romans would have never seen one before. It would have been really scary, but even as frightening as this would have been for the Romans, Rome still prospers. Rome is able to not only defend their city, but take territory away from Carthage. The third and final Punic War was more of a precaution. The Romans wanted to make sure that Carthage would never bother them again, so Rome demolished and burned Carthage to the ground. And this would start the process of Rome going from a republic to an empire, because the larger Roman territory became, the more unstable their republic form of government would be. As Rome got bigger, it experienced more problems. The most serious was the discontent with the plebeians and the breakdown of military order. The gap between the rich and the poor was widening, and soldiers were becoming way more loyal to individual generals than to Rome itself. A military leader named Julius Caesar joined forces with Crassus, the wealthiest man in Rome, maybe even in Roman history, and Pompey, a popular military general. With their help, Caesar was elected consul, and these men dominated Rome as the first triumvirate. The three of them were big fans of progressive laws, such as land distribution. They wanted to give more to the plebeian class and thought that the patricians could still have a lavish lifestyle, even with a little bit less. They forced laws to pass through the government thanks to intimidation from Pompey's troops. Consuls are only in power for 1 year, so after Caesar's year, he's given a governorship of an area called Gaul, a place we today would call France. While Caesar was away, a few things happened. Now first, Crassus died. He was fighting the Parthians. Remember at the end of Alexander the Great, the Seleucids took part of his empire, and we mentioned that they were later conquered by the Parthians? Yeah, those guys killed Crassus. Another incident to take place, Pompey not only wins consul, but he also switches political sides. He no longer believes in the progressive ideas he once took part of with Caesar and Crassus. Pompey and the Senate decide that Caesar's getting a little bit too powerful, and they demand Caesar not only breaks up his legions and gives up his position in power, but returns to Rome with no form of protection. Caesar knew what was happening, and he knew if he returned as he was asked without any kind of protection, he would be arrested for corruption during his year as consul, among other things. So he decided the best course of action would be to return with his giant army. Pompey knew right away that Rome's military would be no match for Caesar's right now, so he fled to Greece in order to train up the military and fight for a different day. And many senators joined him, so Caesar actually was able to invade and take over his hometown. Or would I say homeland? Homeland, hometown, I guess it's still a city. Caesar eventually goes after Pompey's army and of course defeats them, and Pompey flees to Alexandria in Egypt. And Alexandria has its own situation going on. We know the Ptolemy dynasty or empire took over the Egyptian territory after Alexander the Great. They were one of the three empires. And when Ptolemy the 12th dies, he wrote in his will that he wanted his son Ptolemy the 13th, wow, what a creative name, and his daughter Cleopatra to co-rule. And yes, this is the Cleopatra. Well, that idea about co-ruling never works out well, and there's obviously war within Egypt about who should be on the throne, and this is what's going on when Pompey flees to Alexandria. The advisors and supporters of Ptolemy assume that if they kill Pompey, it will put them in good favor with Caesar, and Caesar will either leave them alone or maybe even help Ptolemy win this civil war. So they kill Pompey, and it infuriates Caesar, but not for the reason that you think. Caesar wanted to be a ruler who believed in forgiveness. He was in pursuit of Pompey, but to make him come home. And he is so upset that he won't get the chance to reconcile with his old friend that he decides to join the Egyptian civil war. In support of Cleopatra, he puts her right on the throne. And Loki most likely has a child with her, but that's besides the point. Caesar will go back to Rome, and he will take his place as dictator for life. And you hear the word dictator, and you think, oh gosh, dictator, awful human. And that's a fair thought based on the modern interpretation of a dictator. And many did see Caesar as a dictator, like in modern sense, but many didn't. And I'll let you decide what you think. Caesar was a dictator who forced his nation to let him help out poor people, like land distribution and raising wages and things like that, especially with his soldiers. He loved his soldiers. And the senators were not for this. Remember, they don't like these progressive ideas. They're not happy Caesar is forcing his will on the rest of Rome at the expense of the patricians. So they come up with a plan. On March 15th, 44 BC, the senators led by Marcus Brutus call for a fake Senate meeting in which Caesar's supposed to join. And they jump him, stabbing him 23 times. Like, that isn't just, hey, I'm gonna kill you real quick type of thing. That's a, hey, let me get my turn at him, and continuously stabbing you to get all of my anger out type situation. Like, that's a little bit excessive. And this event is known as the Ides of March. It's still on some calendars to this day, but the Ides of March is referring to the day Julius Caesar was murdered, and it created a giant civil war in Rome. And the Civil War sides were those who supported Caesar believed he was the best thing to happen to Rome, that he was helping those less fortunate, and those who disagreed just wanted to stay as rich as possible and didn't care about those who needed extra help. Those who saw Caesar as a dictator believed he was undermining the checks and balance system, and he wasn't going about things the right way. Sure, he was helping people, but at the expense of others. And they didn't agree with him forcing Rome into that situation. Now, you are welcome to agree with whichever viewpoint you feel like you align with the most. Either, heck yeah, stab him, or aw man, wish he lived. That is totally your call, friends. 3 of Caesar's greatest supporters band together to crush the senator assassins. These 3 would be Octavian, Caesar's grandnephew and adopted son, Mark Antony, Caesar's most trusted general, and Lepidus, a very powerful politician who always supported Caesar. And they formed the second triumvirate. Their alliance, however, is going to end in more jealousy and more violence. Octavian forced Lepidus to retire, and then he and Mark Antony become rivals, though this is the same time that Mark Antony meets Queen Cleopatra of Egypt. Yes, she reappears, and Mark Antony falls head over heels in love with her and follows her back to Egypt. Does he have a wife back in Rome? Yes. Does that seem to matter to him? Not so much. Octavian accused Mark Antony of plotting to rule Rome from Egypt, and another civil war erupted. Octavian showed up to Egypt, where along the way, many of both Mark Antony and Cleopatra's forces changed sides, and decided Octavian was definitely the winner amongst them all. Mark Antony heard a whisper that Cleopatra killed herself, and he was so distraught that he killed himself. But she was fine, so there's that. And then Cleopatra locked herself in a mausoleum and sent a note to Octavian asking that she and Mark Antony be buried next to each other. By the time Octavian reached her, she was dead. For like real this time. And Octavian went back to Rome and takes the name Augustus, or Exalted One. And yes, this is where the month August comes from. They, yes, literally added a month to the calendar for this dude, so he must have been one heck of an emperor. He also declared that he was the Son of God, and yes, This was the emperor in charge during the time of Jesus Christ. And now, under Augustus, Rome is finally an empire. I mean, it's been an empire for a lot longer than this, but now they're actually calling it an empire, so it's fine, it's fine. Rome is now a vast and powerful empire, and will actually see a long period of peace and prosperity under a multitude of their new emperors, and this era is called the Pax Romana. The Romans hold their enormous empire together through incredibly efficient rulers, and Octavian, or Augustus, was one of the best. And that's where we're gonna leave off with Rome today. Now, are we done with Rome? Not in the slightest. The fall of Rome is actually gonna bring about a new era, and that's what we will be starting with next class, the demise of the ancient Roman Empire, which I think you will enjoy because some of the most ridiculous excuses of emperors will be exemplified as the reasons for Rome's decline. So, see you guys then!